So just refresh my memory on last we talked. Actually, here, let me just double check. I'll just double check the actual stream because that would suck if I can. Okay, can you say something?
Yeah, here we
Can
are.
you say something?
Yeah, here we are.
Okay, there we go. We got
I
the
think
echo.
I'm actually louder than you are.
I can turn mine up a little bit. We'll see if anybody actually watches. But I should probably tell people that I'm so terrible at this. This is the thing. I'm sad if nobody watches, but then I'm like too scared to tell people that I'm actually doing this. So it's.
Yeah, I know the feeling, but it's also like there's so much muscle memory that it has to be developed, right?
Yeah. Oh, is that the actual? Because I think I did the. Yeah, I definitely did the YouTube one wrong. Throw open the channel. Get that link. What are you using for a browser these days? Are you?
Safari.
Yeah.
Yeah. I actually just happened to have to installed Chrome for a bank thing yesterday. Otherwise,
Chrome
I prefer not to even have it.
It's kind of the new IE in a way, where you have to hang on to it.
Oh, yes. Right.
Okay. There, I told somebody anyways. All right. So when last we talked, you were... Oops, that's not the right... I want to go here. We were doing a podcast. I don't even know where... A Minecraft podcast.
That's right. I think it was literally like 10 years ago.
And like... In my mind, it was like we did a lot of episodes, but I don't think we actually did that many, did we?
I feel like maybe we did 12.
Oh, and of course, never digging down is a very common thing in Minecraft.
Yeah, and I actually like only recently kind of dipped back into Minecraft because I have a nephew who plays Minecraft, and they have added a lot of new stuff. It's pretty great.
Every so often, my kids will pull it out because they're definitely past the sort of like target demographic if you're not seriously into it.
Yeah.
There we go. There's our show. 11 episodes, technically. 2015 is lost. There's no actual MP3 here. It's just good luck. Imagine what it sounded like.
Right.
Who runs this site anyways? That's fun. Yeah. It's fun to see them like sort of dive in and every 6 months or whatever, at Christmas time they do it often too, where they'll just like we've sort of banned every other game unless it's collaborative, so they can't do Fortnite, they can't do etc. the stuff they normally do, and they're like, what if we play Minecraft? And it's kind of how my parents I imagine them thinking like when we pulled out Lego again at Christmas time or whatever. It's sort of feels the same.
Definitely.
So
yeah, definitely. It's all screen time now.
Yeah. I still wish the multiplayer aspect of it is interesting. Because I think they still have the Realms thing, I think, but they because Microsoft has to make money now, they it's just a wall of buying and upgrading and buying more maps and skins and So, anyways, okay. So since last we talked, you haven't done any other podcasts, or have you done any other podcasting type things?
I have not. No, I've just been keeping my head down. I still just a breeze refresher. I'm an independent web developer. I have since, in the past few years, I've also kind of started selling. I have a line of socially conscious stickers that I sell on Amazon and Etsy. They're
nice
sticker packs with pronouns on them that like companies and people buy to take to events.
What's the address for your?
Pronoun.town is the website.
I think I remember
very simple one-page website that just links off to stores, but it's been surprisingly like successful. It's like, it's not, this isn't really a money-making thing, but people really are interested in having these things at their events. It's just a way of making people comfortable without having to like make it a big deal.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Sweet.
So it's been a very satisfying thing to work on.
In Spanish as well.
Yeah. It's cool. It's been a lot of fun.
how, oh, I mean, we could do a whole nother side, but where do you, is this like you source these somewhere, or how, like you're not hand making them?
Those I actually designed and sourced from somewhere as an experiment just to see.
Yeah.
So I've got a couple hundred of these sitting around, but the stickers themselves I print myself,
Yeah.
just because it's fast and easy, and I just send big batches of them to Amazon, who handles most of the fulfillment for me.
Right. Sweet.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's cool. It's like one of those things that isn't a lot of work, but seems useful, especially now.
Yeah. And especially for people who are like, I could imagine there'd be the people who like know why they would want that and would do it. But there'd be lots of
Mm-hmm.
people who'd be like, I'm supposed to do this. I don't know why it's good, but if there's an easy way
Mm-hmm.
to make it happen, kind of like the iTunes thing, buying music back in the day, it's like I could pirate it, or if it's $1, Steve Jobs made it
Right.
easy, I'll do it that way. And sort of like
Yeah.
for even the people who
Right.
are like confused as to why it's important or whatever, but they can just
Yeah.
order some
Just
stickers.
make it easy.
Yeah. So sweet. You had a recipe thing going on for a while too, wasn't? Or is that still?
Over COVID, me and
Oh,
a couple of friends were working on uh, like building a food blogging network. Like I had a partner and another woman we'd worked with back in the day who we built a site called scienceblogs.com. For a publishing company, not for ourselves. But we were hired to build a site called scienceblogs.com, which turned into a fairly successful network of like 90 different science bloggers, all working under the same umbrella.
mm-hmm.
It's an independent entity now, I think. It went through a couple hands. But the idea of bringing food bloggers together under the same umbrella seemed like an interesting idea. But as we worked on it, it turned out to be less of a good idea because bloggers are like blogging. If you're blogging professionally, it's much more of an independent effort.
Right.
And bringing science bloggers together was a natural thing because there's a lot of conversation that's happened. People bounce off each other a lot. With food media in particular, it's not nearly as collaborative.
Right.
So we tried a few things and never found any traction. So it's kind of not even really on the back burner, but it's in the back of my head. Like if an opportunity comes up to work with a food blogger, I have a lot of ideas for them.
Definitely like the collaborative. Oh, I see. Sorry, I just
Yeah.
realized on the stream I'm broadcasting my city because I have the weather widget. Anyways, I'm in Saskatoon.
Yeah.
If you're not aware.
But working on blogs in particular is interesting at this particular moment, given all the angst that's being created by the large platforms that are like publishing content on platforms that you don't own is a questionable proposition because they might take the platform away, or the platform might get overrun with Nazis, or yada yada yada. You know what I mean? So like, if you're creating content, whether it's a blog or video or whatever, like you should really start to think about making your own website if you don't have one.
Yeah. And even a podcast too, theoretically.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just to
Like
keep
any kind of content should live on your website. Syndicate it from there, federate it from there, but start with your own website.
That's where I know you're well aware of this, but for any randoms, the whole podcasting as a medium, like blogging was a thing, obviously, and it's kind of like it's a website, but it happens to be a subgenre of a thing called a blog, and that comes with it generally. Technically, it was a RSS feed, which meant it could be syndicated wherever, and you could subscribe, etc. But obviously, websites themselves don't have to have a RSS feed to syndicate, and so then corporations can slightly more easily take over that idea.
Yeah.
Whereas podcasting has still managed to hang on to, you have to syndicate it unless you build it into a very siloed wall.
Right. Unless you're Spotify and you've invested $100 million in Joe Rogan.
Which even that is funny because like there have been attempts to, outside of Spotify, they're sort of the big gorilla, obviously, that has managed to get big enough that they can justify obviously building off the
closing
music.
their walls. Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas there have been other apps over the years who are like, we bought Trevor Noah and we bought other things and we like, they're going to be exclusive to us. And then everyone just kind of like, no. I don't want to. So anyways, but yeah. So, I saw my friend Spencer popped in. Can I start a podcast even if I don't like you two? I will allow it. I've only I've done 2 YouTube podcasts in my lifetime, neither of which are active, and
Yeah.
I think
For
they're
a
actually
while, you could only have a podcast about Minecraft, but we have moved
yeah,
past that.
exactly. Yeah. So yeah, the Tim's joining me here graciously because I think it was 2 weeks ago maybe or whatever it was, and I was like, I'm gonna go live, and then I like completely chickened out, had
And
the
then you
voice in my,
didn't.
and I didn't go live, and then Tim messaged me. He was like, I was gonna learn something, or I was looking forward to it, or whatever, and I was like, here's why I didn't, and then you were like, graciously, we're like, what if I came on and just asked the dumb questions or whatever that I don't, maybe you didn't say
Yeah.
dumb, but the questions.
I mean, I can ask dumb questions. Don't worry about that.
So if you're out there in YouTube or Twitch land watching, you can feel free to throw questions like Spencer into the chat as well. And I'll do my best to pay attention to them and remember to look at that. But yeah, that's what the beauty of podcasting is. Much like blogging is, you can do anything you want with it, kind of, for better or worse.
You can do as much or as little.
And I didn't plan this, but I'm wearing a Transistor shirt right now from Justin. But just in terms of podcast hosting, for anybody who's not aware, there's 1,000,001 podcast hosts out there, and most of them are great. They're not. It is a simple mechanism of adding a new post, and then just like a blog, and then the episode goes out. And the one thing I like to dispel the myth to a lot of people, especially clients who come to me. This is not a pitch for my services, but I do edit podcasts for clients as a business. But is the idea of like, most people come to me and ask, and like, this would be a question Tim might have asked if I'd prepped him to do this, but I want to hire somebody to make sure my podcast goes every week to Apple Podcasts, to Spotify, to etc. And all these different places where podcasts are listed so that people can hear it. And it sounds like it's a hard process and you need to have a lot of technical knowledge, but it's a bit like the making the Rice Krispies and whatever thing, where it's like, it seems like it's a lot of work, but actually it's a Rice Krispie Squares, like that commercial, if you're old enough to remember that, where it's a lot of work, but actually isn't, because it's basically set it and forget it once. So I don't have it set up yet, because you do have to have a single episode. But let's say this old podcast. No, this one's unlisted. Never mind. Keep picking.
Yeah.
Lindsay has it set up, I know. Distribution.
Yeah.
So basically, once you've set up your podcast in Transistor or another podcast host, you get an RSS feed. And then for Transistor, this is what I love about them. They're really great at user experience and making it nice to use. But basically, you hit a button and then they can walk you through kind of like this idea of submit my show to service X, Y, and Z, and then it's done. And then from then on out until you shut down your podcast, it's always going to be there. And you don't have to, each week, you don't have to go to Apple and go to Spotify and go to Amazon and go to all these places to make sure your podcast is there. So did I explain it well enough, Tim? Is that?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know how here's a format question. Do you want to talk and then maybe we follow up about what you just spoke, or do you want me to interrupt?
You can interrupt. I'll maybe pause for questions.
Okay.
We'll go from there, but like, because of the delay sometimes. But,
okay. I'll interrupt if I feel like it's fitting and pressing at the moment.
And then there's also the live. Do you see the live chat thing on your side? Like, as far as, or do I have to put it up there?
I see that.
You see that then? Okay. So I'm being friend of the show. We'll say Jamie. She's over.
I hear a little bloopy noise.
She was mad because I posted about that I was doing this thing. She thought she'd missed it because she slept in or something, and now is trolling me in the chat, which is nice to have. Just nice to know there's a voice out there, or a person, possibly a human.
Definitely.
I think she might be AI, but anyways, always interrupt. Okay.
Yeah. Even as somebody who doesn't work on podcasts regularly, I do have clients every once in a while who have podcasts, and I can attest to the idea that once you get it set up with Apple or whomever, it's really a set it and forget it thing. The only thing my clients need to do is subscribe to their own podcast so that they can make sure the episodes are actually going out.
Yes.
Because every once in a while they'll call me up and be like, this episode didn't go out. And well, you forgot to do this one thing over here.
Yeah.
But like the paying attention is the other part.
Yeah, definitely there's lots of people who I think, for either not wanting to appear vain or genuinely hate the sound of their own voice, don't subscribe to their own podcasts. And so then they would never know that it's actually not going out to the world, or that episode whatever didn't have the MP3 attached properly. And that's where, like, it has gotten worlds better, again, just to pimp Transistor, but like there's all sorts of error codes and issues that will pop up just like that. This thing of like you have to have at least an episode published with an audio file, and make sure before you can submit.
And when you say, just for more clarification, when you set up a podcast in Transistor, like when do you know when something has failed? Do you know what I mean? Because like I set up a CMS for a website, and part of that is a section for entries that represent podcast episodes. How do you know when that podcast episode hasn't made it to Transistor? Does that make sense?
Kind of. Yeah, I think if I'm following, like, definitely a scenario could happen where you would like add a new episode, you'd hit save, you'd publish it, and it seems to have all gone out, but Apple barfs on it because of X, Y, or Z, right? Like, that kind of thing can still happen. You can, podcast network. Let's go back to Lindsay here. So just for an example, like I can preview this. She doesn't actually use Transistor's website. She uses something else, but I can preview it, play it back very loudly, and make sure it's all there, and then go back and edit that episode if something is missing or I need to replace the audio file, or maybe some weird emoji is causing an issue with whatever RSS feed, etc. But there isn't like a strict, you can do like on a technical level, you can do like an RSS feed validator. But those days, it used to be a thing I used to do all the time. I haven't thought about doing that in years now, ever since more. Yeah. Because you used to sort of hand roll stuff a lot more.
Yeah, I had to do it recently for this one client who was like, why are my episodes going out? And aside from that, the particular problem they were having, the RSS validators I was going through were just giving me wildly different results. So I don't know that you can even count on the validators anymore to figure out what's going on.
Some of them are probably out of date because they haven't been updated now in a while.
Yeah, some of them were like, this is fine. And one of the other ones was like, this is garbage.
Spencer asked if I hate the sound of my own voice, can I hire someone to edit the podcast for me and publish? Yes, you can. Thanks for asking. lemonproductions.ca is where you could hire me, in theory. You could also, this is a very big side tangent that we don't need to get into right now, but you can also AI your voice, and then you don't have to even record it. You can just type it. But that's a whole other ball of wax. The one thing that I think what you're getting at, Tim, which is we're a little off maybe the beaten path of where I'm going to get to, but what I advocate for so you would be on the website developer helping someone build a website kind of side of the distribution channel, let's say, and let's say I'm like hardcore on the podcast side. A lot of people like to, like, say, so Shop Talk Shows, one of my clients, web developer podcast, they use WordPress. Can you reintroduce Timothy? You missed it. Well, Tim is a web developer, friend of mine who 10 years ago we did a podcast, 11 episode podcast on Minecraft. So I feel like I'm doing like the radio morning show where every 5 minutes they have to like tell the weather and what they're talking about because new people join.
Weather on the ones.
Yeah, exactly. Anyways, so using something like WordPress where their blog is already in WordPress, they want to just also add their podcast in, which is fine. It's not the end of the world. It can be done, but that's definitely where it gets complicated because then you have your podcast hosted by Transistor, let's say, but then you're displaying it publicly on your website with some sort of WordPress plugin or Drupal plugin or whatever. And for my money or time, that's like a extra headache that isn't fun to deal with because that's where things can happen where a plugin doesn't pick up a new episode. So just for an example, like what I would advocate for is like a subdomain. So like we tried this with our goodstuff.network podcast site where 25 cents was the podcast. So we just did a subdomain of 25c.goodstuff.network. And so then this page, everything about it gets automatically built by Transistor. And then I had to like build in links back to the home site, let's say. But that to me is sort of a better way of setting it up because then they manage all these buttons for you. If you change a link somewhere, you don't have to remember, etc. A nice little subscribe page like /subscribe is set up for you automatically with your whatever sites you've set up or podcast hosting services you've listed. And it's kind of like a podcast hosting company does what they're good at, which is like making sure the podcast goes out, and then the website side does what it's good at of blogging. So, but lots of people started in WordPress before there was nice podcast hosts. It used to be like podcast hosting companies were just like a
Yeah.
utility in a sense, right?
Yeah.
Like you just sort of
I think I did lead us down some digression. Like, can we summarize the thesis of what we're talking about? We're talking about publishing a website versus producing a website.
yes,
Correct?
yeah. So at its core, if you've got you want to have a podcast, you don't have to have a website. You could just like a lot of podcast hosts like Transistor will actually build you a nice site for yourself. You can add pages, you can add all sorts of information on the website. You don't have to know CSS or HTML, but they do a support if you want to add custom CSS.
Because from a technical perspective, a podcast is just an XML file, right?
Yeah. Or like
from a publishing a podcast perspective, it's an XML file with references to MP3 files that any one or service could subscribe to in order to publish your audio files as podcast episodes.
Yes. Yeah. Because the RSS feed or XML file, I never know why one is much, but they actually Transistor actually formats it as a web with it, makes it look nice or whatever. But basically, that could be your website for your podcast as well. So, hopefully, you don't mind me sharing stats. I guess I should. Nobody's, but what I'm hoping to accomplish today. So, if you're brand new, never heard of anything at all, the whole reason why we were doing this in the first place was I jokingly had this as a pinned post on Blue Sky, which was, you followed me on Blue Sky Why, and I'm going to do a podcast about that. People started sort of gravitating to that and thinking it was like a fun idea. And then I put up a forum saying, why don't we do this? If anybody's actually interested in being on said podcast, let me know. At least 10 people did. So I was like, well, that's enough for a 1 season, 10 episode season. And now we're sort of starting down that path of theoretically actually doing the podcast. So does that make sense?
Totally.
So I thought I would work in public, I guess, and every Thursday-ish, depending on availability and time for both of us, Tim might join me to do that. So
yeah, it's great. And because I think one of the things that like podcasting has kind of become a cliche in terms of like, oh, I have a podcast about Los Angeles coffee shops south of Anaheim. But podcasting is literally one of those mediums that is available to anybody. Anybody can start a podcast. Yeah. If you have a phone, you have a microphone, and you have an internet connection, and you can create a podcast. Yeah. So like knowing the basics is one of those things that I think I understand, but I may not fully understand it. So this is definitely helpful for me. But just a 101 level introduction to the medium is critical to a lot of people, I think.
Yeah. I think like it kind of got it felt like it was being replaced with the ease of doing like a TikTok channel or shorts channel. Like, that was like even easier than all the work of setting up a podcast. And I feel like we've kind of, I mean, I'm old, so who knows, but like for a lot of people, we've kind of come back around to the idea of like a podcast actually is kind of worth doing, having fun with, because it allows for longer form conversations. You can share information, you can share whatever. It's not as simple and easy to market and all that kind of stuff, I guess, but it's still
it's also exactly what we were speaking to before in terms of having your own website and having your own blog and having your own podcast, because it decentralizes you.
Yeah.
And makes sure that you can publish, you can own your content, you own where it lives, and then you just syndicate it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the biggest one. Even if it's so for this purposes of this show, why did you follow me on social media? My idea behind it is obviously there's a little bit of like, there might be some referral business that I would get at some point or whatever. I'm not really doing it. It's more for fun than for any official purpose. But I do feel like there's that aspect of fun, but also marketing is kind of what drives me at least into doing stuff. If it's just for marketing's sake, I'll get bored or not want to do it. But if it's a little bit of fun, it's kind of a way to, to double.
I feel like that's the whole world right now.
Yeah.
Fun, but also marketing.
Yeah, exactly. Jamie says, "Hi, Tim." Tim is not in LA. Tim is
I'm in Brooklyn at the moment.
New York. Looking for an apartment in New York.
Yes.
So he just used LA as an example. Hey, Nathan. Yeah, Nathan said the syndication is really simple because that's what RSS stands for, right? Is that officially, or is that just a joke? I'm having
I think it's really simple syndication.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm having an R on stage brain fart. So please correct me if I'm wrong. So just in terms of like, let's say you signed up for Transistor. I don't know if this is a helpful. Are we skipping ahead too far, Tim? But let me know. Besides I don't really want to get too bogged down in purpose. I feel like that's maybe a deeper conversation behind why. But
oh, for sure.
In terms of like, I want to demystify it, like you kind of said, of like, it's really not that hard. I think I kind of want people, because actually it's a little bit self-serving. I don't want to help you, and I don't want you to pay me to help you set up your podcast, because that's like that to me is why I don't do websites, because it's like a lot of, what color of logo do you like? What kind of title do you want for your podcast? Whatever, all that kind of stuff. The like back and forth debating.
Right.
I like to sort of step in once we've got the idea for a show already running or whatever. So that's just my sweet spot.
So like you don't develop podcasts, you take podcasts that are going concerns and turn them into machines that run themselves from a technical perspective.
Is that like a 1930s, what's the going concerns?
Sure.
Anyways, that's my sweet spot. I do help people with like who do want to start a podcast, and like it's not that kind. I wouldn't turn you away, especially if I needed the money or needed the client. But generally speaking,
the difficult part of running a podcast that you handle is the week to week of editing an episode, publishing it to the system, and making sure it goes out, making sure it gets made public.
Yes. Yeah, helping the sort of the it's a little bit of the grunt work, but also sort of the part that a lot of people get either bogged down because they don't know how to edit. So I'm not going to talk about editing the actual podcast today, but that part of it is also stressful, obviously for a variety of reasons. But then also just the sort of mundaneness of like uploading it to a service like Transistor, making sure it goes out, schedule it, write up show notes, add in sponsor details, etc.
Yeah.
So, and from there, like when you're actually setting up a podcast, though, like this is where again something like Transistor is nice because they do their pricing model. I don't know if I can get to their pricing without loading my dashboard. They work on a, like, instead of per podcast, they just work on how popular it is basically. And for most of us, we're well within the starter pack. And then because they allow for unlimited team members, you can also, like, you know, if you've got a podcast with a friend and then your other friend wants to start a podcast and maybe it's only for 5 episodes and you do another one about something else, all those kinds of things, it's very easy to just kind of like start 10 podcasts and have fun with it in the same way that you'd start a blog kind of idea. So you could do like a network of friends, or where some podcast hosts will be like, per podcast, it's $10, and that's $10 a month or $5 a month or whatever. And that's fine. But then each time you start a podcast, it's this question of like, is it worth it to do? Because I want whatever. And so that's where I like recommending Transistor, besides being friends of the friends.
So the constraint on these accounts are it's literally the popularity.
Yeah. And so like 20,000 monthly downloads is the cap across all the podcasts you might have. So I would anticipate like my little silly podcast for why someone might follow me on Blue Sky is going to have maybe if we have 100 subscribers and we do 4 episodes a month, like 400 downloads or something. Like it's a lot to get to 1,000 downloads an episode. So you would be hard pressed, I think, for most of us to hit the 20,000.
But as soon as you hit that 20,000, you're ready to pay $50 a month.
Yeah, if you're getting $20,000 downloads a month, you're in a state where either you're some sort of membership thing or you've got sponsors, and so then you would And I realize for some people, like whether it's 5 to anything over 0 is a big expense, and so I'm not trying to trivialize the idea of like paying for stuff. There are free services out there that host podcasts, but just to be aware that if it's something where you want to grow and you want to be either part of a business or part of a marketing thing, or just even a silly thing that you like to do and not be annoyed at, it's kind of worth paying something for it. So just so that you get a better service, it's going to be reliable. You're not going to have to switch hosting in 6 months because, free podcast hosting company goes out of business. And you're spending more time maintaining the sort of infrastructure for your podcast than actually doing it. So, a little vote of confidence from Spencer, who's a big fat dummy and used Transistor for his short-lived podcasts. He said I was super easy, but I think he meant to say it was super easy. I don't think Spencer's easy. And Jamie, how many downloads per episode is good for a new podcast after a week? I know you have, so the Burnout Collective is a website, podcast, Discord community that does, has a podcast. And I think in that kind of scenario, I believe that like you're hoping the people who already know you listen. So whatever that might be in terms of your Discord numbers or community numbers. And then beyond that, it's a long tail of growth. It's not like the viral thing with TikTok or YouTube even, where, you know, you can get a one hit wonder kind of thing, and that kind of boosts your growth. So, but we'll save that for the marketing episode that we may do someday. All right. Where am I, Tim?
We're talking about pricing tiers.
Right.
Moving on.
Yeah. I think unless there's any, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because most of the stuff
totally makes sense. Because the alternative is that they charge you like based on your production and what you put into their system versus how much usage of your system is actually being generated through your listeners.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I think that makes sense. There is features like the big one that's popular in terms of the business side. Yeah, Nathan, are you? I don't want to say where you are if you're not supposed to say where you are. Anyways, top 25%, 109 downloads in the first. Like, overwhelmingly, the majority of podcasts don't have a lot of downloads, and so don't be disheartened when you don't. Because I could see someone like, just to use Jamie for example, I know they have like a TikTok channel for the Burnout Collective, and like they might have a video that gets like 10,000 views all of a sudden. And that sort of feels like a nice big boost. And it is genuinely on TikTok. But like your podcast is going to be something more like 40 for weeks or for a bunch of episodes. And maybe a year from now, you'll get a good guest and you'll get 1,000 downloads in that episode. And then that'll trickle into meaning, 10 new subscribers or some number. Like it's not the exponential growth that you get on a lot of other channels that kind of maybe is disheartening to some folks, but it is sort of a long tail library, kind of like blogging, where you build up a library of stuff that people can find you through or listen to you through. So I keep slipping into marketing for podcasts, and I don't mean to. So reel me back in.
I guess the one thing that as I look at these numbers, I'm surprised they're not mentioning the amount of data that they're serving up for you. Like monthly downloads is one thing, but the monthly download of a 15-minute podcast versus a 45-minute podcast, that's a big difference for them.
Yeah. And I mean, you can have bit rates and file sizes that vary as well. Like there's one show I subscribe to it's a big popular show, but like they send out massive files, like way bigger, higher quality than they need to for just two people talking. For whatever reason, it's not my show, but yeah, that, I think knowing a bit of the behind the scenes with Transistor and Justin and John and stuff, it all kind of averages out for them in terms of downloads and where I don't think that it's S3 they pay, but wherever their bill is for.
They know what the average is, and they
put that in. Exactly. Yeah. So, so some of the bigger things like the dynamic ads is a big thing in the, like if you're making money off your podcast, then that's the thing where it's a really slick feature that I think is awesome and very underutilized, because it feels like in the sleazy area, like certainly I think we're used to like you're in the middle of a podcast and all of a sudden this ad pops in and then you're like, what the hell is this? Whereas if done well, and like you could say like, and now we're going to stop for an ad, having the ability to go back through your back catalog of 100 episodes and just insert an ad that's timely to today rather than like when you did the show a year ago. That's pretty slick. And it doesn't have to be sleazy and tracking and analytics and all that kind of stuff. It can just be like a way to tell people about a new thing you're doing without having to go back and edit 100. I guess for those of us who were back in the day, you would have to edit 100 episodes manually to do that. Which was not something people would do. So let's see. Just quick question from Spencer. Would you say podcasts are the farthest step in the brand ladder? Like someone is happy to watch your TikToks, maybe they'll follow you on socials, and podcasts might be the last thing they do. Yeah, I mean, obviously it varies across demographics and sort of brand style. Like obviously some, like a show like, what's that Dax Shepard one I was just listening to? Armchair Expert. Like people's entry into that is probably podcast, but there'd be a whole bunch of people who would maybe just find clips of it on TikTok or Reels or wherever they are and see him interviewing some other famous person they like, and then sort of get their way into that show. But for the average, like your business down the street or whatever, podcast would be way down the ladder for sure. A donut shop in town here or whatever, I don't think is going to get a podcast that's going to be highly subscribed to unless they've got some unique spin on it that's really interesting to people. Why they'd like that. A donut shop to me could be like interesting to other donut shop owners or donut makers, right? But you'd be hard pressed to get someone who wants to like get deals on donuts wanting to listen to a podcast.
Yeah,
I guess
a podcast is a tough value add from a marketing standpoint, because a podcast is a commitment from a listening and subscription point of view in terms of time.
Yeah.
And you need to think to go listen to a podcast. And a podcast is hard to produce relative to a 30-second TikTok hit.
Yeah, I think like it is interesting knowing my own business too, like in terms of clients and stuff, how it was like on a huge growth, and then obviously COVID helped in terms of like just more people trying podcasts because they were stuck at home and could buy gear and whatever. But also then with the arrival of TikTok, Reels, etc., as a short form medium that previously was like kind of a shunned thing, you wouldn't want to do quick disposable stuff. Now it's like actually that took some of the wind out of the sails, I guess, of podcasts, because it was just an easier way and a much more palatable way for people to dive into.
Yeah.
I knew as soon as I said it, Jamie said, way to take advantage of the pandemic. As soon as it came out of my mouth, I was like, I know that's not going to be.
Yeah. TikTok really, as you say, it took the stigma off the idea that something short and fast to produce was not authentic.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
In terms of presenting yourself as, a personality or somebody that you want, people to watch.
Yeah. Yeah. It became more authentic. It genuinely is more authentic than a produced medium like YouTube or whatever. So, all right, that's enough. That's a lot of rabbit trails. I've gotten no closer to launching this podcast.
Let's do it.
I should have done it by myself, Tim. This is good. So yeah, in terms of like when you actually set up, so you sign up for Transistor, let's say, or insert your podcast host of choice, and basically it walks you through a few questions of like your podcast itself. What do you want to call it? The description, your artwork, and there's a variety of reasons why all of this is very important. I'm not going to go too far down the path of what it's important, but basically if you think of it as looking at whatever podcast app you listen to podcasts in, and you see their artwork, you want something that's going to grab people and sort of explain why and what it is, what the show is about, what kind of like style it is. And the title obviously is going to be listed there as well. Those are the two things that kind of just grab people right away, or don't turn them off right away. And all the rest of this is kind of like for SEO or for just metadata about your show. Obviously the category and style of show will help it be found a bit, but even that's kind of less. I don't know, when's the last time you went looking for philosophy as a category, I guess. Like some of the, obviously you can think of a show, I'm sure, that fits very strongly in a category. You're like obviously a basketball podcast is going to be found by other people who like basketball podcasts. But so just to show that, again, it's just a settings screen, just like anything else. There's no like weird podcast magic that you have to know in order to set up a podcast in terms of the basic information around it.
It's really just like setting up, like creating a blog post or creating a blog, except the content is an MP3 instead of a bunch of text.
Yeah. And all the rest of this is stuff that you can look into, but you do not have to know any of this for any means. And obviously once you've got, all your social media stuff, if you either use your personal stuff that you want, or maybe a show specific, and that's a whole other question too of why, but, and even something like analytics. So a service like, because obviously everybody wants to know, is anybody listening and how many are listening, like Jamie was saying. And basically there's a bunch of different services that you could pay for that something like Transistor supports, where you'd want to pay them to help you with analytics and get more detailed analytics. Or you can just rely on what Transistor or Podcast Host has built in. I often turn on the Open Podcast Prefix project, which is basically an open source way of sort of publicly tracking podcast downloads and listens and stuff, and kind of just helps the industry, the good people in the industry who aren't trying to like figure out a way to game it all and do stupid stuff with the business. Anyways, it's a service that allows you to do that well. Track downloads. What am I trying to say?
Because, like, correct me if I'm wrong, but the nature of podcasting and like the decentralized nature of it makes it hard to add that layer of data collection, right?
Yeah, yeah. You're kind of
And that, I mean, that's which is partly why Spotify is happy to pay Joe Rogan $100 million, because it means all those visitors are to all those Joe Rogan viewers and listeners are going to Spotify, and they can collect as much data as they want.
Yeah, exactly. Because you have to listen in the Spotify app, obviously, or they may have opened it up a bit, but let's just use those terms. But like, so they know exactly when someone stops. They know exactly where they went next inside of Spotify. They know why they stopped, or they know that they stopped listening to the podcast and went to a music song instead, or whatever, and or skipped, stopped, shared something, replayed something. All just like what YouTube does for video, right? It's a very similar idea. So. Let's see. I think so. For this sake of this show, I literally just did the AI generated artwork just to get it started. At some point, I don't generally think that's an awesome way to run a show, but again, keeping in the silly, light, quick. Yeah, I forget what prompt I even typed in, but basically just obviously something with "Why'd you follow me?" And so hopefully it's fairly explanatory. Ideally, just from a graphic, I'm not a graphic designer, but from a graphic design perspective, you want it to be able to be read fairly easily at a small thumbnail, like on on your phone, in a list of other shows in a grid. Does your podcast artwork kind of stick out enough so that you can see what other shows, what your show is compared to other shows in the similar genre or a search or whatever. So that's the main reason why to have either, if you've got a recognizable face or a title that is going to grab people. That's some of the big ones. So, I'm trying to think next steps with this particular podcast. So I've got, I guess in terms of the basic premise of the show, it's guest driven. So much like what Tim and I are doing, except it will be with someone who's like new to following me in theory. Although some of them are familiar faces, but so I'm going to set aside the whole idea of like how I'm going to record the show. Maybe we'll do that next time. But basically with a podcast, you obviously need an episode, a file, and that's what allows you to get the show out into the world. And something that's new in the last couple of years, definitely wasn't a thing back when we did Never Dig Down, our famous Minecraft podcast, is having a trailer.
Award-winning.
Or award-winning, yeah. So, I think I had one person who's like listened, their friend's kid listened to the podcast because they wanted to learn about Minecraft, and they found me somehow. But basically, one of the things that's new is a trailer, and so this is a really easy way. It's especially helpful once you've got a show going, because obviously if you only have one episode, people are just going to listen to that episode and they'll get an idea of what your show is. But down the road, let's say you've got 5, 10, whatever episodes, or you're launching it new and kind of want to build a following before you launch your first episode. I'm not too worried about that again with this silly podcast, but a trailer is a great way to sort of highlight why. So you'd build a 1 to 2 minute sort of trailer for your show, talking about what it is, maybe highlighting some guest audio that's coming, music, etc. Kind of lets people at a glance or at a listen hear what the show is going to be like, that they're going to know that it's good quality, that it's well produced, and the voices that they hear on the show are something that they want to listen to, or it doesn't turn them off from listening to. I don't know. Have you ever listened to a podcast trailer exclusively to figure out if you would want to listen or subscribe?
I don't think so. I was just wondering where those trailers present themselves.
Yeah. So each service is different. I'm just trying not to see my own subscriptions, just to see what someone else might see. So yeah. So like here, Netflix has like a little season 2 trailer.
Got it.
Not everybody. Let's see if they, speaking of Armchair Expert. Yeah. So they just do latest episode, which probably because they're hosted in Spotify somewhere, but I would guess a lot of,
I think a trailer is like if you're not being hooked in by one particular episode, if you're like in discovery mode, a trailer is ideal. I certainly find trailers useful on YouTube.
Yeah.
when I come across a channel and I'm like, well, what's this channel about? The trailer's great. If you don't want to engage with, a 20-minute video, then they've got a 2-minute trailer.
Yeah. Let's see.
This is a CBC podcast.
We gathered here this morning for a celebration of life.
Yeah.
A story of murder and heartbreak.
Anyways.
Very uplifting. Thank you.
Yes. On that note, everybody go have a good day. But yeah, basically that's the idea. Like, so in this, for what I would do for the purposes of this show, I'm going to pre-record, or I'm going to record conversations with people before I release episodes. And so I might have, let's say 5 episodes I record before I start releasing them. So from those 5 episodes, I could build a bit of a trailer where I'd say, I'm Chris and I'm going to be interviewing people for this reason. And then here's some highlights from upcoming episodes, listen to some little clips that are either funny or interesting or highlight murder and death, I guess, if I was going after that demographic. And then that would at least give people both, it gives me the audio file I need to list my podcast in all the services before I have episode 1 ready. And then from that, I can tell people, here it is in Apple Podcasts, in Spotify, etc. Go subscribe so you're ready for episode 1. And it's a way of building a bit of hype for it, but also just on a technical level, like behind the scenes right now, I can set up the show and basically be ready to go. So I know that everything's working without risking, let's say you record episode 1, which is like your big, you've put hours and hours of editing and production time into it. And then you realize as you hit publish or send that you forgot whatever in the setup, and there's nobody actually on Spotify to listen right now because you didn't connect that.
Right. That makes sense. It makes sure that like setting up the podcast and delivering the first episode aren't the same task.
Exactly. Yeah. And the services themselves are like this, again, compared to 10 years ago when we did our podcast, Apple Podcast, for example, is way more savvy as a service in terms of just because they've had to deal with companies who are like, no, we don't want you just to, it used to be you'd basically have to hit publish on episode 1 and just sort of hope it all worked. Whereas now you can go into Apple Podcasts behind the scenes, the service, as a user of that service, not like subscriber or listener, but as a producer, and schedule it out, make sure it's all the boxes are ticked for getting published on Apple Podcasts. It was a bit of like hopefully they approve me back in the day. These days that's all gone by the wayside. And so it's much more savvy that way. So I just wanted to highlight what Nathan had said. Analytics services can only collect is your IP address, but Spotify is, email address, credit cards, so they can offer brands much better targeting. So, yeah, all that fun stuff. That's where Apple has kind of walked the line of both allowing for a bit of data and analytics on listeners while also keeping you a bit more anonymous from your listener. And even to the point where they now offer, you can subscribe to a podcast in terms of paying money within Apple Podcasts, but it's still a little bit more opaque to the podcaster as to who's actually out there in their sort of membership or whatever, in a way that Spotify allows for a little more of that. So,
yeah,
I'm sure at some point you and I, or maybe I don't know if we ever talked about it, but it was like, if this podcasting thing takes off with Minecraft, we can, have a membership and then we could charge $10 a month to listen to episodes early or whatever. And so that kind of thing is way more possible now. You don't have to know how to do.
Yeah, there's so many options and they're so sophisticated, and they come with varying levels of access to your own customer data, right?
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Which is again where kind of the argument of, do I use the easy tool that gives me less access to my customers, or do I kind of not roll my own, but like pay for a more sophisticated tool that I can run myself?
Yeah, exactly. So I think we're almost up on our hour here. I want to respect your time, and if anybody's actually still out there, it's time. And I just hit my Stream Deck, and oh no, it didn't pause. Anything that comes to mind? So what, like, sort of my next step? I should start a Notion document or whatever of what's going to happen next, so I remember. But my next steps, anyways, is to start scheduling out some interviews with the people who've said they want to be on this podcast and have conversations with them. Because I actually don't really know, especially a guest-driven podcast. You don't really know what you're going to get from your guests until you have those conversations, obviously. And
who are you thinking about talking to?
Well, I have a list of I don't want to show it right now, I guess, but there's people who submitted on Blue Sky. I put a form out where.
What kinds of people though? What do they do? And what are they interested in?
They're all. I don't know if I can generalize too much. It's a variety of people. It feels like a fairly good mix. Let's say if there's 10 of them that sent in their information, 2 would be like people who seem like a little bit like they've got their own thing to pitch and they want to be on this thing. And so that's why they're following and that's why they're interested in it. Some are just doing their own thing and curious and having silly fun as well. Some are just, one's a friend, Spencer, for example, who was on earlier, is a friend who's just like put his name in just to support or whatever and have a bit of fun with it. And so that's where it's kind of like jumping off of this silly idea of why'd you follow me? I've always wanted to know, like even back in the day on Twitter, I was like, I wish there was some sort of like generic or anonymous way of people saying like, here's why I followed you. Cause not that I would tailor what I wrote to them, but if you're here because you saw me write about WordPress once and that tweet went viral or podcasting or whatever, but all I ever do is talk about dumb memes or whatever, I think we're both going to be disappointed because you're never going to like my stuff. And I'm never going to write something again that appeals to you. And because I always used to use my Twitter account for more joke than businessy, whatever. And so I've always just kind of thought it'd be interesting without being, again, targeting and knowing exactly who the people are, to find out why someone might follow you. So,
cool.
So yeah, these are a variety of people that I've never talked to before, or well, other than Spencer, I think, on the list. But so they've handed over their Blue Sky address, or like their account on there, let's say, and then an email address and name, and sort of a brief kind of bio or why they're interested in possibly being on the show. And then presumably I'll talk to them. We'd have some sort of interesting enough conversation that's worth editing down to, a listenable conversation. And then I would want to build up 3 to 5 episodes before I start actually releasing something, just to have a bit of a backlog of episodes ready to go. And from that, like I was saying, I would build a trailer just so that I can have something to point people to subscribe. And Jamie was interested also in being on, who I've talked to before. And what was I saying? And then getting the trailer ready so that people can actually subscribe to the show, and then start releasing episodes shortly after that. And I don't know. I think the model of like releasing episodes where you can have just some shows like that Shop Talk show I was showing earlier, they're up to whatever it was, 600 and something episodes, 647s. And so they just release a new episode every week, basically, other than like Christmas and holidays and stuff. They basically have a new episode every week. Every Monday, a new episode comes out. That's their model. There's another model that's like seasonal. So there's going to be a 10, 20 episode season, and then we'll stop, and then we'll retool and come out with season 2 or season 3 or whatever of however many episodes you decide is in a season. And or there's shows that are just kind of random, and they put out stuff whenever they feel like it. And so that's kind of the cool part, I guess, of, maybe we'll end here, but like that's kind of the cool part of podcasting is there isn't any right or wrong way to produce a podcast or release a podcast. Obviously there's ways that are like beneficial if you're trying to market or attract people or sell a thing. That's a whole, world in itself. But for 2 dudes talking tech podcast, or 2 people talking about video games, or 2 people fighting the patriarchy, or whatever the show is, there isn't like a hard and fast rule of this is what you have to do. Does that make sense? Yeah,
for sure. I think I can think of like at least one example of a podcast I subscribe to that meets each of those criteria, like weekly podcasts, seasonal podcasts, and whenever they feel like it podcasts.
Yeah. So that's where, like, on a back end service like Transistor, you can actually set it up like serial or episodic, and then there's seasonal. I think once you add an episode, you choose season number and episode number if you want to support that. And all that is just like everything else. It's just metadata. It's fairly meaningless. There's no hard, like if all of a sudden I punched in episodes, whatever, it'll accept that and just keep going. And it'll just display that in Apple Podcasts or in Spotify or whatever. We'll support some of that metadata so it can display it nicely. And So for this show, sorry, go ahead.
No, it's really for it's for whatever app I'm using to know how to organize your podcasts so that it can show it to me in logical order.
Yeah. And that's where, like, the serial one is in particular is an important distinction, because that's where it's a 10 episode serial podcast, serial predating Serial the podcast, but where it would show it in reverse chronological order, typically, where you would start with the beginning, the first episode, rather than the most recent episode. Because most podcasts are kind of like, here's our most recent episode, but a serial one, you're kind of like, this is a story.
I want to start with the first one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't want to know who got murdered or how, even though like most podcasts, like Netflix documentaries are like, could be summarized in 10 minutes and be like, this is what happened. This is what we discovered in the end. And this is who's guilty. But it's the story that you tell along the way that makes it more interesting.
Exactly.
Obviously. So for the purposes of this show, I think what I'm going to do is actually try. I've never really tried out the seasonal model as far as something that is done, even if I keep going indefinitely. Spoiler alert. Even if it's something where season 1 just becomes 20 episodes because so many people want to do it. But then I do want to have like a definite, like, this is going to stop and I'm going to wait until there's enough of a reason to do another episode, and then try and batch a bunch all at once so that it's a little less like, the main thing I tell clients is just set the expectation of what you want to do and what's actually doable, not ideally, especially if it's for business or marketing or whatever, or even just like you want subscribers to listen, you do it on a regular basis. Every episode comes out, it's on a Tuesday, or it's once a month. It's on the first Tuesday of the month, or it's every 6 months. Doesn't really matter what it is, but just be consistent within that, ideally, so that people know when and why they might expect a new episode. So I think whatever we tried back in the day with the Minecraft one is probably every couple weeks, and then slipped to every 3 weeks, and then slipped to once every 6 months, and then just stopped. So I do have this idea of sometimes of like old shows that have RSS feeds, because somebody out there is probably still subscribed to it, just like randomly popping a new episode in that feed, just like, hey,
Totally. Yeah.
You're still alive?
If you're still here, you should come listen to our new show.
Yeah, exactly. So, all right, I think we'll wrap it up there. If you have any questions that you're watching, quickly throw those in. I don't know how to do a live stream part very well. That's Jamie's specialty. But any other questions, Tim?
No, I'm cool. This was great. There's a lot of, like, I know how to help people set up a podcast from the CMS side of things, but there are certainly a lot of things I don't know about producing a podcast and like the long-term tasks of managing a podcast.
We'll have to remember to show you, once I have an episode to play with, the ways of like embedding versus linking in a WordPress post, let's say, the benefits and drawbacks of those kinds of things, because that's an important distinction too, in terms of when in your case in particular, I don't mind tangenting off into your use case with clients or whatever, because sometimes it's helpful to sort of understand why you would make a WordPress post for an episode versus just letting it go out into the world versus all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, Jamie's left with lots of unanswered questions and very unsatisfied, so we'll try and do this all again next Thursday, maybe. We'll be I'm not going to follow my own rule and say tentatively Thursday afternoons, but depends on Tim and I being available. So, but thank you for asking questions. Sorry, Tim. And
thanks for letting me sit in.
Jamie said, "You're great. I'm the one leaving unanswered questions." So, upvotes for Tim. All right. I'm going to shut it off. Thanks for watching, everybody. See you later.